Mikey Madison barely had time to celebrate her Oscar win. Between interviews, flashes, magazine covers, and million-dollar contracts, all she wanted was a quiet moment. Just a simple cup of coffee, far from the cameras. But in that coffee shop, something happened. A simple request, an invisible child, and an impulsive decision that would change her life forever, and would also touch the lives of millions who followed this story. If you want to know how the most talked about actress of the year became the face of a silent revolution, and how a single piece of bread connected two lives that were never supposed to cross paths, stay until the end. Because this story is about Mikey Madison. But it might also be about you. On an ordinary morning, Mikey Madison, still processing the whirlwind of interviews and events after her 2025 Oscar win, decided to escape Hollywood madness for a bit. She walked to a quiet little coffee shop in a more tucked-away neighborhood in Los Angeles, just looking for a peaceful moment with her black coffee and a simple croissant. But peace disappeared fast when she felt a gentle tug on her jacket sleeve. Turning around, she saw Ethan, a skinny, dirty boy with eyes carrying the kind of exhaustion number 10-year-old should ever have. With a trembling voice, Ethan didn't ask for money, didn't ask for help, all he wanted was a piece of bread. A small, humble request that, between the lines, screamed for rescue. Mikey, who had spent weeks moving the world with her powerful performance in the role that won her the Oscar, felt an instant connection. Maybe because Ethan's eyes reminded her of a character she had once played, or maybe because those eyes were just too painfully real to ignore. Instead of simply handing him the bread and walking away, Mikey did something unexpected. She crouched down, looked Ethan in the eye, and said, "Come with me. Today, you get to pick whatever you want." Ethan hesitated, looking around like he was waiting for some cruel prank. But Mikey smiled, stood up, and held out her hand. Unsure of what would happen next, Ethan grabbed that hand, and that small gesture would mark the beginning of a story that would change both their lives. Inside the coffee shop, the contrast was almost cruel. On one side, Mikey Madison, freshly awarded, her face on magazine covers, surrounded online by fans celebrating her every move. On the other side, Ethan, invisible to most, surviving on scraps and rare kindness. But in that moment, no cameras or headlines mattered. All that mattered was that one hand had reached for another. As Ethan stared at the display filled with pastries and treats, Mikey realized this wasn't random. Something inside her knew this boy needed much more than a piece of bread. And she was about to find out exactly how much. The door chime rang as Mikey and Ethan stepped into the coffee shop. The warm scent of fresh coffee and baked bread filled the air, but Ethan didn't look excited. He looked uncomfortable. He wasn't used to places like this, places where people didn't see him as a person, but as something that didn't belong. Mikey noticed the curious stares from a few customers, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she made it a point to make Ethan feel welcome, as if he were an honored guest. "Pick whatever you want, no shame," Mikey said in that calm, gentle tone, so different from the cold formality of the adults Ethan was used to. He hesitated, but then his eyes lit up as they landed on a massive chocolate cake, thickly coated in glossy frosting. He pointed at it, almost as if apologizing for wanting something so simple. Mikey smiled and ordered the cake, plus an orange juice to go with it. What followed was a scene no one in that coffee shop expected. The 2025 Oscar-winning actress, sitting across from a homeless boy, laughing, chatting, and sharing a slice of cake like old friends. Ethan devoured the cake like someone who hadn't eaten in days, and with the silent gratitude of someone who knew every bite was a rare gift. Between bites, the atmosphere shifted. Mikey noticed that Ethan was beginning to trust her. And that's when the magic happened. He started talking. He told her he hadn't slept under a real roof in weeks. That sometimes, he traded small favors for a bottle of water or an apple. Mikey listened without interrupting, as if that moment meant more than any red carpet or award speech ever could. And as their conversation flowed, a realization grew inside her. This meal wasn't just about filling Ethan's stomach. It was about something much bigger. It was about dignity. About seeing someone invisible and remembering that every story deserves to be told. Without knowing it yet, Mikey and Ethan had just begun a connection that would rewrite both of their destinies. The cake was already nothing but crumbs on the plate, the orange juice nearly gone, but the conversation between Mikey and Ethan was only just beginning. With that hesitant way of someone still unsure if it's safe to trust, Ethan started sharing pieces of his story. He spoke like someone who didn't want to remember, but at the same time, desperately needed to let it out. And Mikey, with the trained gaze of someone who's played countless fictional lives, now found herself face to face with a real pain, far deeper than anything Hollywood ever wrote. Ethan said he lost his mom when he was very young. He couldn't remember her face very well, just a song she used to sing before bed, a lullaby he tried to hum for Mikey, but lost halfway through. After his mom passed, there was the foster home. A place meant to protect him, but instead, it became the setting for his worst nightmares. With his voice trembling, Ethan described the shouting in the hallways, the nights without dinner, and the adults who used fear as their only tool for control. One night, after being unfairly punished for hiding a piece of bread to share with a younger boy, Ethan made the decision that would change everything. He ran away. With a torn backpack and 3 coins in his pocket, he threw himself into the world. Freedom felt sweet at first, but it didn't take long to realize that the streets aren't kind to boys on their own. Every corner held a new danger, from relentless hunger to the cruel stares of people who saw him not as a child, but as a threat or an easy target. Mikey listened to every word like the world around them had disappeared. The woman who had just won an Oscar for playing a broken character now understood something: real pain makes even the most powerful script feel small. And something inside her, maybe the actress, maybe just the human being, knew this encounter was no accident. Ethan didn't cross her path by chance. With her voice soft and careful, Mikey asked if Ethan had anyone in the world. Any family, any friends. He thought for a moment, then with tears in his eyes, whispered a name: Emma. His older sister. The only person he ever loved after his mom. The girl who once promised she would never let go of his hand, but who disappeared too. Mikey felt a shiver down her spine. This wasn't just an act of kindness anymore. This was a mission. Mikey Madison was never the type to solve everything on her own. Maybe that's why she played her last role so well, a woman who learned to ask for help when the weight became too much to carry. And now, standing in front of Ethan and a story way too big for a simple act of charity, she did what every wise mentor does: she looked for allies. The first to join this mission was Mrs. Jenkins, a gray-haired lady with the kind of smile that comes from having seen it all. She had worked at that same coffee shop for years. Curious about the boy's presence and touched by Mikey's kindness, she walked over, dish towel in hand, and heart wide open. Within minutes, Mrs. Jenkins and Ethan were talking like old friends. She asked what he liked to eat besides cake, and he told her about the time he found a whole sandwich in a clean trash bin and called it the best lunch of his life. Mikey watched them and realized Ethan needed much more than just finding his sister. He needed routine, care, someone who could offer him a meal without him having to dig through garbage cans. That's when the idea struck her: what if Mrs. Jenkins could help look after him during the day? After all, Mikey's schedule, even if flexible, was still a roller coaster of post-Oscar commitments. Mrs. Jenkins agreed immediately, moved by the trust. But Mikey wanted to go further. She called an old acquaintance, Kate, a social worker who had handled similar cases before. Mikey told the whole story: how she met Ethan and how they were looking for his sister. Kate, used to messy cases and red tape, was shocked to get a call straight from a Hollywood star. But all it took was hearing Ethan's voice, shy, cracked, but painfully real, for Kate to understand this wasn't about fame. This was about saving a life. Within hours, that little coffee shop table became a makeshift war room. Mikey, Ethan, Mrs. Jenkins, and Kate, each bringing their skills, fears, and hopes, built a support network Ethan never dreamed he could have. The boy who spent weeks believing he was invisible was now seen by 4 sets of eyes, and held by 4 steady hands. And as the conversation kept going, a new idea started to bloom. What if this search for Emma wasn't just theirs? What if they could mobilize the public, social media, Mikey's own fans, and turn this into a real-life chain of kindness? It was just the beginning of something much bigger. The conversation at the coffee shop had gone past the 2-hour mark when Mikey, looking at Ethan, felt a question forming inside her. A question even she wasn't sure she was ready to ask. But, like any great actress, Mikey understood the power of following instinct. And right now, her instinct was screaming. This boy needs more than just temporary help. He needs a home. With a soft yet steady voice, Mikey looked at Ethan and asked, "What if you stayed with me for a while? Just until we find Emma, or until you have somewhere safe to go?" The silence that followed was almost heavy. Mrs. Jenkins held her breath. Kate, still on the phone, listened without saying a word. Ethan's eyes went wide, as if the question didn't make sense. No one had ever offered him something like this. And especially not someone famous, someone whose life seemed 1,000 miles away from his own reality. Mikey noticed his shock and quickly reassured him. "It wouldn't be anything official. I know there's a lot of legal stuff involved. But my house is big. There's an extra room. And maybe you don't have to spend another night on the street." Ethan didn't answer right away. It was as if the idea was too new, too big for his brain to process. He had spent so much time being rejected that the mere possibility of someone wanting him there felt too foreign to believe. He looked at the floor. Then at his hands. Then finally, at Mikey. "Can I think about it?" "Of course," Mikey smiled, giving him space. But deep down, in that very moment, she already knew. Even if Ethan said no, even if he ran away again, she wasn't going to let him leave her life without a real solution. Across the coffee shop, Mrs. Jenkins discreetly wiped away a tear with the edge of her apron. And Kate, ever the pragmatist, was already listing off legal difficulties and the risks of exposing a vulnerable child to media attention. But Mikey barely heard her. Because right now, the only thing that mattered was Ethan's expression, a look that held fear, hope, and a tiny, almost forgotten spark of trust. And as the imaginary camera zoomed in on Mikey's face, a new reality settled in. She was about to put her life under the spotlight again, but this time, for something far greater than any award. The first night at Mikey Madison's house was silent. Ethan barely spoke, ate very little, and slept with the light on. Mikey understood. Some wounds take a long time to heal, and silence, sometimes, is the only shield a child knows how to build. The next morning, as the smell of pancakes filled the kitchen, Ethan appeared at the door, clutching the torn backpack he brought from the streets. Mikey pulled out a chair, served him a plate, and started talking about silly things, the weather, the neighbor's dog, the cake from the coffee shop. And in the middle of that meaningless conversation, Ethan suddenly dropped a sentence that changed everything. "You know, the foster home wasn't just bad because of the food." Mikey stopped stirring her coffee. She just listened. Ethan took a deep breath, like someone gathering courage to pull a poisoned memory from the very bottom of their soul. There was a room. No one liked going there. We called it the silent room because everyone who went in came out different. And I went there a few times. Mikey's hand trembled slightly, but she stayed calm. "What happened there?" He stared at his empty plate, as if the answers might be hidden somewhere in the melted butter. "They yelled at us. But it wasn't just that. There were weird touches. Things I didn't know if they were normal or wrong. I just knew they hurt. And no one believed us, because we were just lying orphans looking for attention." Mikey's stomach turned. This wasn't just a sad story about neglect. This was a story about violation, the kind the world tries to sweep under the rug because it's too painful to face. But there was Ethan, small and broken, trusting her enough to finally say it out loud. No speeches. No big dramatic reaction. Mikey just said, "That will never happen to you again. Never." And Ethan, without even lifting his gaze, whispered, "Promise?" Mikey knelt down, looked straight into those sad eyes, and answered as if she were standing on a film set, performing the most important scene of her life. "I promise." In that moment, she wasn't the 2025 Oscar winner. She wasn't a Hollywood star. She was just a woman, looking into a little boy's eyes and speaking the most powerful truth in the world. You are not alone. The plan to keep Ethan away from the cameras lasted exactly 48 hours. Not because Mikey wanted publicity, far from it. But in a world where every step of an Oscar winner is tracked, it didn't take long for a paparazzi to snap the picture. Mikey Madison, in her backyard, kicking a soccer ball around with a skinny boy wearing a t-shirt 3 sizes too big. The photo went viral. Within minutes, fan forums, gossip sites, and celebrity blogs were buzzing with theories. Who's the mystery boy? Some guessed he was a secret nephew. Others speculated Mikey had adopted a refugee child. But the truth was much deeper and much more painful. It wasn't until Mikey herself gave an exclusive interview, explaining how she met Ethan and why she took him in, that the story exploded. Fighting back tears, she told the whole thing: the request for bread, the heartbreaking confession about the foster home, and the desperate search for his missing sister. The public was stunned. The Oscar-winning actress, the red carpet star, the face on every magazine cover, had now become something much more powerful, a symbol of real empathy, not staged charity. But with the support came resistance. Lawyers representing Ethan's former foster home came forward, denying every accusation of abuse. Conservative groups questioned whether Mikey, single, famous, and with zero parenting experience, was qualified to care for such a fragile child. The media split in two: some called her a hero, others called her reckless. Ethan, meanwhile, could barely make sense of it all. For a boy who spent years feeling invisible, seeing his own face plastered across every screen felt surreal. Mikey shielded him as best as she could. She limited interviews, protected him from the online chaos, and activated her legal team to handle every obstacle. But in the middle of that storm, one thing became crystal clear. The public didn't just want gossip. They wanted to help. They wanted answers. They wanted to know, where is Emma? That's when Mikey realized this story wasn't just theirs anymore. It belonged to everyone. And if the world wanted to help, she would let them. That's how #FindEmma was born, a social media campaign to locate Emma, Ethan's older sister, missing for months and the last missing piece of this broken family. What started as a private gesture had turned into a public movement, one with the power to move hearts, break down barriers, and maybe, just maybe, bring Ethan back to the only person he ever called family. The #FindEmma started as a simple idea, but within 24 hours, it had become a digital phenomenon. Mikey Madison's fans, advocates for missing children, social activists, and even other celebrities joined the wave, sharing the old photo Ethan had kept of his sister, the last real piece of Emma he still had. The picture, a faded Polaroid, showed a dark-haired girl with a shy smile and a t-shirt stained with paint. It wasn't much. But to Ethan, it was everything. And now, the entire world was searching for that face. Ethan watched it all unfold with a mix of hope and fear. What if they found Emma? What if she had changed so much that he wouldn't even recognize her? What if she didn't want to come back? Mikey saw all those thoughts written across his face. That night, she sat beside him on the couch and broke her own silence. You know, Ethan, I've been scared to face someone from my past too. Ethan looked at her, surprised. Mikey hardly ever talked about herself. Before I was an actress, before any awards, I was a messed up kid too. And some of the people I loved walked away, not because they didn't love me, but because they didn't know how to help me. Sometimes, facing those people again is really hard. But most of the time, it's worth it. Ethan didn't say much. But that seed was planted. Meanwhile, social media was on fire. Leads poured in from all over the country. A girl who looked like Emma was spotted at a shelter in Arizona. Another girl at a community hospital in Texas. Each false lead hit Ethan like a punch to the stomach, but they were also proof that the world hadn't given up on her. Mikey kept the fire burning, recording emotional videos to her followers. You all helped me win an Oscar. Now, I'm asking for something way more important. Help me give this boy the one thing he truly wants, the chance to find the only family he has left." And then, the call came. A staff member from a shelter in Albuquerque, New Mexico, recognized the picture. She said a girl named Emma had stayed there months before but was later transferred to another center in the same network, a place where she still was today. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. Mikey dropped everything: interviews, rehearsals, meetings, and within hours, they were on the road to Albuquerque. In their hands, they carried more than hope for a reunion. They carried the strength of millions who had followed their journey, proving that sometimes, love travels faster than any headline ever could. On the way, Ethan held that old Polaroid like it was a piece of his soul. And Mikey, hands steady on the wheel, knew this wasn't just about finding Emma. It was about healing wounds, keeping promises, and proving to the world, and to themselves, that love is still the most powerful force of all. The road to Albuquerque felt endless. Every mile, every highway sign made Ethan's heart beat faster. Hope and fear were fighting inside him, because finding Emma would be incredible, but what if she didn't want to be found? To break the silence, Mikey tried making small talk. She asked about old movies, favorite foods, even tried teaching Ethan a silly game on her phone. But nothing could cut through the heavy silence in the car. Until Ethan started humming. Mikey recognized it immediately, the same lullaby he had sung at the coffee shop, the song his mom used to sing to him every night. But this time, he wasn't singing it for Mikey. He was singing it for Emma. Like a message only she could hear, a silent prayer, hoping his sister would somehow be listening, wherever she was. "That song," Mikey said softly, not wanting to interrupt. "It's all we had," Ethan answered. "Me and Emma sang it together whenever we were scared. When we were hungry. It was our way of remembering Mom." That's when Mikey had the idea. Instead of writing a new song or trying to create something fancy, they would do something much simpler and way more powerful. They would record a short video. Just Ethan, singing that lullaby. No production. No script. Just the raw, unfiltered truth of a boy singing to the sister he lost. They recorded it right there in the car, shaky phone camera and all. Ethan held Emma's Polaroid in his hand as he sang, voice trembling, eyes shining. Mikey posted the video with a caption that simply said, "Emma, if you still remember this song, your brother is waiting for you." The response was immediate. The hashtag Find Emma exploded again, but this time, with a soundtrack attached. People across the country shared the video, creating a digital chain of memories and hope. And across town, in a small shelter, a 14-year-old girl borrowed a staff member's phone. When she saw Ethan's face, and heard that lullaby, the pen she was holding slipped from her hand. She knew that song. She knew that voice. It was Emma. Mikey's car pulled up in front of the small shelter in Albuquerque, just as the afternoon sun painted the sky orange. The soft glow lit up the building's simple walls, as if the universe itself knew this moment deserved a perfect frame. Ethan couldn't move. His hands trembled in his lap, his heart beating so loud it felt like it might echo through the car. Mikey didn't rush him. She just placed her hand gently over his and said, "No matter what happens in there, you're not alone anymore." Ethan took a deep breath, opened the door, and stepped out. Inside the shelter, a smiling staff member was already waiting. She knew exactly who they were, after all, the whole world knew by now. She led Ethan and Mikey down a narrow hallway, stopping at a small common room where a few teenage girls were drawing, reading, or just passing the time. In the corner, wearing headphones and scribbling in her notebook, sat Emma. She didn't see the door open. She didn't see Ethan walk in. But when she heard the first shaky Emma from her brother's trembling voice, she froze. The next few seconds felt like slow motion. Emma stood up, eyes wide, caught between dreaming and waking. And then, when their eyes met, the whole world shattered and rebuilt itself in the same instant. Ethan ran. Emma ran. And the hug that followed wasn't just a hug, it was the kind that puts all the broken pieces of a soul back together. They cried, they laughed, they pulled back just to look at each other again, just to make sure this was real. Mikey, watching quietly from the doorway, couldn't hold back her own tears. It was more beautiful and more real than any Hollywood ending she had ever filmed. But that hug wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Emma had her own scars, her own painful stories from the time they were apart. She wasn't some lost princess being rescued into a happy ending. She would need time, trust, and, above all, a home where she could be just a teenager again, not a survivor. And that's how Mikey, Ethan, and Emma began writing the next chapter of their lives together. Emma would move into Mikey's house too. She and Ethan would share the guest room, singing that same lullaby their mom used to sing, but this time, without fear of what tomorrow might bring. And because nothing about this story was ever small, the world that followed every step of their journey wanted to be part of their new life too. Companies offered scholarships, art classes, and mentorship programs. And Mikey, inspired by everything they had lived, took one more giant step. She announced the creation of the E&E Center, a support center for homeless youth, named after Ethan and Emma. Emma, with her artistic gift, painted the first murals on its walls. And Ethan, the boy who once believed no one would ever hear his voice, started recording small videos, telling his own story to kids who still felt invisible. What started with a simple request for bread had become a revolution of care and hope. Ethan and Emma didn't just find a home, they found a purpose. And they proved to the world that love isn't about saving the whole world. It's about saving one universe at a time, the universe inside every invisible child. How many times have you crossed the street just to avoid looking someone in the eye? How many stories have you judged without knowing a single truth? How many faces have you seen and forgotten in a matter of seconds, as if they were just part of the background? What if I told you that behind every one of those invisible faces, there's an entire universe of pain, dreams, and hope? Ethan and Emma aren't just characters in a touching story. They are mirrors. Mirrors reflecting thousands of forgotten children, locked away in foster homes, living in overcrowded shelters, or just surviving on the same streets you walk every day. How many Ethans and Emmas have already given up on dreaming because no one ever saw them? How many talents, how many songs, how many lives could be transformed if just one person took the time to see past the dirt, the fear, and the silence? Mikey Madison didn't save the whole world. But she saved the entire universe living inside two invisible children. And that's the invitation I leave for myself, for you, and for everyone who made it to the end of this story. Who will be the Ethan or Emma crossing your path? And what will you do with that chance? Because real life, true life, only happens when we find the courage to see the invisible. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Your next action could be the start of the change someone out there is desperately waiting for. Share this video. Someone in your circle might know an Emma, an Ethan, or even be the one who could offer a helping hand. Support serious organizations that work with homeless youth and foster care reform. And most of all, the next time someone asks you for a piece of bread, offer a conversation. Offer your time. See the person, not just the need. We never know what story is hiding behind a simple request. But when we choose to listen, to look, and to act, we don't just change someone's life. We change the world, starting with our own.